Well, hello, hello. I promised you a animal communication tip or tool or an answer to your question, and here I am giving you some insight straight from your animal's mouth. And I'm answering a question today that came in from Emma, who asked, "How do I know if it's my animal really talking to me or if I'm making it all up?" Great question, Emma, and thank you for asking. Oh, I'm loving this GIF. There's this kind of attachment on Facebook Live. So let's get to it, shall we? One of the biggest challenges that a lot of people face when they're starting to remember that intuitive, nonverbal communication is our first line of communication. Always. Hi, Farah. Nice to see you here. Is in reclaiming their natural ability to communicate telepathically. And it's differentiating authentic telepathic communication, especially when it's coming from non human beings, from the thoughts and the ideas and the projections and the assumptions of our human intellect. This thing on our head, the thinking mind, and the ego that always wants to be right. So let's dive in, shall we? And if you have, hi Monroy, if you have often wondered if your animal is really talking to you and you don't quite trust it and you think you're making it up, just know that anybody can communicate with animals and trees and rocks and plants and other non-human species if you just trust that the information that comes through to you is coming from that other being. Just remember, communication from non-human species, it's not usually, for me, and this is just my insight in working with animals and their people for over a lifetime, actually, is that it doesn't really come as messages, but as a whole package of knowing, feeling, being, and understanding. It's very kinesthetic. And depending on what your strength is, maybe you are clairaudient, maybe you are more clairsentient and you get touches, maybe you smell things, maybe your animal sends you pictures. Whatever it is for you, it's often far beyond what is comprehensible in our human language. And we are, as I like to think of myself as the mediator, the one that translates the messages, and it's a way of knowing and understanding because that's our language, and that's what we do. Is we like to find meaning in everything, but that's not how other species do it. They don't overlay ideas around communication. They're very direct, they're very to the point, and they don't waste energy on the fluff and the extra words. So think of it like this: if you're ever doubting that the animal is speaking to you, messages that come from our own thoughts and our own ideas and meaning making of things and projections, they have a very different quality about them. And I'm going to list some of those for you, and you can check out what works for you. So the communication isn't exactly words. No, remember, this is why you can speak to an animal that's in a German household or that speaks Chinese, and if you have their name, their address, and a photograph of them, if you're not with them in person, you can communicate with any animal because it is beyond language the way that we know it. And remember, telepathic communication is your birthright. It's a natural ability in language that is shared universally by all species. And if you see me looking down, I've got this running on two platforms right now. I'm just playing with things because I can, but I'm totally with you. So please give me more questions. I love the questions, Farah. Thank you, and I'm going to answer that in a minute. So just remember that it's like a muscle, and you're born pre-verbal, right? You knew how to send out nonverbal communication to your parents through facial expression, through body language, through micro movements, and it is totally intuitive. It's like, think about a time when You maybe were engrossed in reading a book, or you were watching Netflix and you were totally in the story. And all of a sudden, you just got this urge to get up and open the door. And when you did, there was your dog waiting to come inside, or you went over to the window and your cat was waiting to come inside. That's how animals communicate. It's very somatic, it's body based, and it's a language that's shared universally by all species. But we often need to relearn and rediscover and reawaken this ability, which can often be quite confusing because our thoughts are imprinted over it, and our feelings and our agendas from the discernment of what is that and what is coming authentically and clearly from another being. And if you were a highly sensitive empath and you had some kind of trauma early on in life, you, like me, probably much preferred the company of animals to people, because they never judge, and they're so patient and they're persistent, and they come in with their own soul contracts to teach us how to be better human beings. And they have so many lessons to impart on on us. So be gentle with yourself if you're just starting to remember how to communicate with animals or non-human forms. Trees have given me the most incredible messages over the years, and the mammals and the beings in the oceans, they all speak to us if we're just quiet enough to listen. And that's why I want to emphasize that while everybody has the ability to communicate telepathically, not everybody um, is going to use this ability to try to help others until they are ready in their own spiritual evolution to consider that it's not woo, it's pragmatic, and it's also very scientific. So, how can you tell the difference between authentic telepathic communication and your projections and ideas that come from the human mind and the ego? So, great question. Yes, exactly, Farah. That sudden urge to go check on them. They're communicating with us all the time, but because we're so busy and we're so absorbed in the meaning making and in the mind most of the time, we miss some of these very silent communications. So here are a couple of ways that you can discern whether you're making it up or whether it is actually coming from an animal, or maybe one of your plants telling you that you need to water it because it's thirsty. And I've had that happen many, many times with the plants and the trees in my garden. So just remember that authentic telepathic communication, it's very, very fast, or at least that's been my awareness on this. The information comes in very, very quickly. It's almost like instantaneous, which is why I always say to people, even in communicating with their body, which has its own innate intelligence, and we often bypass the subtle cues of our body saying we need to look at something until we're in a full-blown healing crisis, that it comes in very fast. So the first thing that comes to your mind is generally coming from the other being. And it's this quality that often causes people to ignore or overlook it, because it's just so quickly, and because our minds are going at a million miles an hour, we often miss the gift in what is being communicated to us. And let's face it, it's not our fault. It's the insane asylum, as I call it, that we're all committed to, that nobody knows it, called planet Earth and being human. And in our culture, our human language, we're conditioned to believe that the more lengthy and more time intensive and the more complicated the communication is, the more important it must be, which is totally wrong. We tend to blow right past telepathic communication because it happens so fast that we often just miss it unless we're really paying attention, which is why before I actually take people through my Being Human through Animal Communications program, we go through the trust process, which cover the three basic foundations of being able to communicate, and also to then offer healing to an animal, or to do a medical intuitive scan to see what blockages are showing up in your animal. And that is the three P's, which is present, to be present with the energy of what is, to be patient, and to be persistent. Right? You need to train the muscle. So the more that you practice this, the better you're going to get at it, and the more confident you're going to get at it. So just remember that you have to slow everything down and be totally present with the energy of your animal in order to get the messages from them, because it is very, very fast. And what I've asked often when I'm communicating with an animal that is maybe highly stressed or is traumatized, and that is if they can talk, because sometimes they're too busy keeping themselves safe, or they're in the middle of climbing a tree or pouncing on dinner to listen to us, and they'll say, not now, I'm busy, is I ask them to please slow it down, because I'm a human and I don't get it as quickly as they do. And of course, they're very eager to comply, because they're just so grateful that a human being actually wants to listen to them rather than talk at them. So quite like children, isn't it? So the second way that you can know that the information is coming from your animal and not your mind is, it's often very surprising and unexpected. It kind of comes out of the blue. And most of the time it's when you're relaxed, or you're walking out in nature. I had a cat once that I was tracking, a lost animal that I was tracking. It was a big ginger cat that had an incredible sense of humor. And he'd been on my mind, and we'd opened the lines of communication, and I was tracking him, and I was walking on the treadmill, and out of the blue I suddenly got this energetic hit, and I got an incredibly overwhelming smell of jasmine. And I knew it was this cat, because he'd told me that one of his favorite places that he loved to lie was underneath the jasmine bush at the back of his human's house. So remember that telepathic communication with an animal will often present a perspective that is completely different from what our human perspective is. And it'll be something that we wouldn't have expected to hear or understand. So maybe it's not the way that you would talk. I often find that they language very differently to the way that I do. And also remember that if you are talking to a cat who is way down on the ground and you're up here, that their perspective on what they see is going to look very different to what you see at your eye level. So this is where gestalting, actually asking permission to merge with the animal's body, can give you a totally different perspective on life, and often your own challenges as well. Also, telepathic communication is very complete and whole. As I said, it's multi-sensory. It's not linear, and it isn't one sense. It's multi-sensory. In other words, it often comes in a whole package of information, of understanding that is very sensate. And our human minds will translate this into a language and words, but telepathic communication really takes the form of messages or sentences. So it'll be one word, or it'll be one picture, or it'll be one feeling or one smell. They never confuse things or ask two questions at once. They're very clear. So when you're communicating with your animal and you want to know something, make sure that your questions that you ask are very exact. Only ask one thing at a time. Okay, got it? Good. All right, so just remember that, I find many people get overwhelmed or confused by this, but it's actually really simple if you break it down, because they may feel and maybe you're one of those people, that you're not really receiving messages. They couldn't possibly be real telepathic communication, that it's only for the gifted or the special or the psychic ones, which of course is absolute nonsense, because it is, as I said earlier, your first line of communication is always nonverbal. And you're communicating with your mother when you're in the womb nonverbally. So, the opposite of what you think is often true. Also, telepathic communication is received by and lands, as I said before, in the body. It's a felt sense. It's somatic, right? Soma means body. So it's a deeply somatic way of receiving awareness and information and understanding. And this is where oftentimes when I'm doing a medical intuitive scan on an animal, I know the difference between what is my body's tension or pain pathways and what the animal is. Because if I suddenly get a feeling that my ear starts throbbing, and I know my ears are perfectly fine, that isn't going to be me. It's going to be the animal telling me that there's something going on with their animal, with their ear. And, then you can go into deeper questioning of, is it microparasites? Do you have parasites in there? Is it a yeast infection? Because they do understand what we're saying, just as they know when we're coming home. Animals can tell the time, FYI, side note there. But just remember that, people will first, when you're starting to learn or remember, and I prefer to say remember because it is something that you just know innately. So it's just relearning, that you might get an awareness or sensation, and it's a very felt sense, either in your heart or your belly or both. And there's a quality of landedness or groundedness to the energy. It's very deeply rooted in these communications and understandings. And it's completely different from the sort of mental thinking process that actually limits us a lot. So you may experience feelings of sensation that accompany the messages that your animal are giving you. You might feel tingly, or heat or cold, or you might just be overwhelmed with grief. I remember when I was working, in the round pen with a beautiful little pony when I was in England, who'd had an incredible amount of abuse, and we were doing some join up work. That when I first connected heart to heart with him, I just started weeping. And they were tears of relief. They weren't tears of grief, but they were there. I was just overcome by tears because finally this little pony was in a safe place where he could actually start to transform through his trauma and the join up that we were doing. So, think of it that if you sort of drop back into receiving mode, because remember, you have an antenna, you are emitting a frequency, and you're fine tuning your frequency to meet your animal at their frequency. And animals do operate at a much higher frequency than we do, because they're not getting heavy around all the woes and the what ifs and the scary things that could happen in life. They're very present to what is in the moment. So you'll start to see that in contrast, when the messages are coming from your own thoughts and ideas and projections, that they're going to have a very different quality. They're going to be very much head based. So I want to give you just a couple of ways that you can start to play with really recognizing and identifying these kind of thinking communications, so that you can start to drop back into really being an open receiver, for the animals or the plants or the trees or the ocean, or the earth to speak to you. There's no limits on this. Everything has its own vibrational frequency, and everything is communicating with you all the time. And we've forgotten that we are part of nature, right? We are not separate from nature. And this is where we need to operate if we're going to start to create a new earth, where we're meeting other energy fields or energy beings or life forms in a place of mindful regard and mutual cooperation, right? So that there's realization learning. And this is something I go into depth with in the trust process. So if you want to know about that, let me know. So think of it like this, that when you're thinking, there is an overlaid human perspective and emotion that goes with it. And often there is a really big story attached to it, because we do, it's part of our nature that we get really carried away by drama and trauma and all these sort of human perspectives with another species. And we always have these assumptions that are often, we go into labeling, we go into ranking species as being more important or less important than the other. And there's often a lot of judgment and blame, or shaming, or making something or someone wrong when you're doing it from a mental aspect. And animals don't function from that. Their messages are very clear and very pure and very exact, as I said before. So if you can also tell what's yours and what's not yours. So when you go into a message that derive from thinking, they're very often prefaced with these types of words or thoughts like I think or I wonder. There's an identification rather than an individuation or a oneness with things, because you go into, well, maybe, or what if, and I don't know. So trust what you know, and stop pretending that you don't know. Okay, you are a psychic, intuitive, highly sensitive being, and you know how to do this. You just need to train your muscle. And thinking often has a feeling of a lot of mental pressure. You're always trying to figure things out. It's what I call head tripping, where it's like, think of it like, you have this beautiful innate intelligence of your body, which is the horse, and your head is like the rider. And we're often driving our way through life being totally disconnected, because we're in our heads, we're not in our hearts, and we're not in our body. So if you notice that your head suddenly feels like, oh my gosh, there's so much pressure and my body's so tense like this, or you're leaning forward, or you're holding your breath, or you're taking a breath, or you're leaning backward, and you feel the back of your body and your feet connected to the earth, this can really help you. Grounding is a fantastic way, sending a grounding cord down to the great central molten lava core of the earth, and up through, up into the heavens above, and really anchoring yourself through a grounding cord is a beautiful way to actually stay in your body, not leave your body and go into your head. Making sense so far? So, do that. I always say, set the intention before you speak to an animal, and then look at grounding yourself. Give a blessing, maybe say a prayer, before you start calling in the animal that you want to communicate with, because it takes a lot of skill and a lot of maturity and practice and guidance to be clear, and to be able to really identify the difference between authentic telepathic communications and our human thoughts and ideas. But it is totally possible, believe me. And the more you do this, it just becomes your first nature rather than your second nature. And just remember, as I said before, telepathic communications is your birthright. You were born with this natural ability and language that is shared universally by all species that we share this beautiful blue planet with. But you have to be patient, right? You have to be present, and you have to be persistent, when you're starting to relearn and rediscover, and reawaken these unique talents and capacities that you have, and not get confused about what your own thoughts and feelings and agendas are from that which is actually coming authentically and clearly from another being. Think of it like a beautiful wave that just kind of washes over you, and then it goes out, and you receive it, and you integrate, and you synchronize your body with it, and then it flows out, and then another wave of beautiful intuitive connection comes over you. And this is why I want to emphasize that the animals are waiting for you to ask them. The animals are waiting for you to receive the lessons and the soul contracts that they've come into this life to share with you. And they are always so generous and so forgiving and so patient with us. And they're communicating with this multidimensional understanding and awareness that we are only starting to begin to understand and to access again. So you can learn so much from your animal teachers if you just put aside all your projections, rejections, expectations, separations, decisions, judgments, and conclusions about any and all of that. So that's something I like to clear before I start an animal communication session, as the communicator between the animal and their person. And it can be such a beautiful place if you just kind of approach animals with this attitude of great reverence and honoring of their open-hearted presence to meet you there, and they're thrilled that you're willing to learn and to discover. So if you'd like to learn more about interspecies telepathic communication, please check out my comprehensive all-in-one package. It's a beautiful, robust program over on my website, called Being Human Through Animal Communications, because they really are teaching us how to be the best possible version of ourselves that we can possibly be. And it's a beautiful class. I love teaching it. And I've had hundreds of people go through this and go on to be professional animal communicators, and empower other people to be their own medicine and trust that they're enough for their animals. So you don't just learn how to do animal communications, but you're going to learn about animals in spirit and animal totems, and how to receive messages from animals in the other life, in spirit, and also how to help animals through the transitional process when they're leaving their physical bodies, and how to help people in that grieving process as well. So check it out. And if you have any questions and you'd like to know more about the trust process, I have got one more live workshop, 2-day workshop happening in Johannesburg, probably around mid November. I haven't finalized the dates yet, but if you'd like to get on the waiting list for that, let me know, and I would love to meet you there and assist you and support you in being heard. We do it in a beautiful field of horses, and we have chickens and sheep and goats and ducks and swans and a whole farmyard of the most incredible animals. Oh, how lucky am I? I have a little moth that's landed on my face. So check it out, and please keep your questions coming in, because I'm really loving doing these and connecting with you on a deeper level, so that you can really get into right relationship with your animal companions. And wow, what a gift, because when we show up and want to help them, they actually help us a whole lot more in the process. So thank you for joining me. I know I'm really late tonight. I've had a busy day, but keep your questions coming in, and I'll meet you here same time, same place tomorrow. All right. Take care. Lots of love. Bye.